afternoon, everyone, and I'm calling this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 101 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Today we have witnesses both online and in the room. So online, I'm just going to remind you, put up your hand, make sure that your interpretation is chosen to your choice, and also if you are not speaking, just please have it on mute. For the people in the room, just ensure that you choose French, English, or on the floor. Those are your options. And the last thing is to keep your earpiece away from the microphone. So that's just some detailing there. And a reminder that all questions should come through the chair. We will be keeping a speaking list if there's any other questions, and we'll continue with that. So let's get back to business. So pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, November 27th of 2023, the committee will resume its study on the implementation of the red dress alert. And sorry, got to turn my page here. And today in person we have 2 witnesses and online another. Yes? G. Okay, fantastic. So I was just looking at this. So from the National Family and Survivor Circle, we have Hilda Anderson Perez, who is the chair, as well as, oh my gosh, Kylie, but I don't know your last name.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Keely Tenfingers, and I'm a technician with the National Family and Survivors Circle Incorporated, and I'm here as a support to Hilda. Thank you for having us here today.
And thank you so much for coming in and filling in that. Online, you will find Sandra Delarond, and this is where Sandra's going to help me, because although she has helped me say this, it is an Ojibwa word, and so it's Giganan Ima Anan Anig. And so I am sorry, and please, I'm sure, Sandra, you're rolling your eyes. You may have to fix that for me. But what we will be doing is we will be passing the floor over for our witnesses, 5 minutes for each group. And so I'll pass the floor over. We'll be going online first to Sandra. Sandra, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. When you say you just pretend.
If you could hold for 1 moment. The volume in the room is very, very low, so could we raise that? Please go ahead and start again.
Okay, Madam Chair. So when you say Giganawe Mananik, you just imagine yourself canoeing down the Red River, which is where I am today. The waters aren't open yet, but they're getting there. So thank you for this opportunity to present to the Standing Committee today on the Red Dress Alert. So the safety and protection and well-being of Indigenous women, girls, and gender-diverse relatives must be essential in creating a better country. The final report of the National Inquiry, Reclaiming Power and Place, outlined a central finding of genocide, and had outlined 231 calls for justice that would create transformative change for Indigenous women, girls, and our gender-diverse relatives. It is critical that the Red Dress Alert, or whatever we choose to name it, be implemented immediately. Myself, along with many of our colleagues, some who are at the table, held consultations over the winter to hear from community, distinction-based representative political organizations, community-based organizations, about what an alert system means, what it could look like, and how it should be implemented or could be implemented. What is clear is that an alert system must be co-developed and co-led by Indigenous relatives. That beyond an alert, that support to the community and to families of the missing must be in place. People that are actually going to look for the missing, and people that are going to support families during the process, and people that will support those that have been located there is a requirement for a wraparound support. And each one of those functions also requires training to ensure that communities and families have the capacity to support one another. The alert system, when it is implemented, should take into account regional disparities and be very clearly and have an accessible approach where technology, language, and community are considered. Indigenous people living in urban areas have been largely ignored, erased, or undermined, and silenced under the current distinction-based approach. So there must be respect for full inclusion of the urban Indigenous population. We with Gaganawe have been working on a data project that we call a story map that clearly outlines that many of those that have gone missing or murdered in our territory come from communities, certainly, but have relocated to urban environments for medical education and for the reasons of escaping poverty and violence. Many of these relatives have then become vulnerable and targeted by perpetrators of violence. I could share many anecdotes that would illustrate the ongoing systemic violence. However, there's not the time. It should be considered that many of our relatives are indeed internally displaced persons under the meaning of the UN Convention on Refugees in 1951. In fact, we must provide support in a manner which acknowledges the human rights and international conventions of our relatives. Thank you, miigwech.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add on because online the camera was off, so I didn't get a chance to introduce Charlene Lavalley, who is the president of the Association of Métis, Non- and Status Indians Saskatchewan. So Charlene, I'll come back to you in 5 minutes, but thank you very much for joining us as well. I'm now going to pass the floor over to Hilda. Hilda, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Standing Committee on the Status of Women members. I am Hilda Anderson-Piers, Chair of the National Family and Survivors Circle, a nonprofit organization incorporated in April of 2023, led by Indigenous women and gender diverse individuals who are impacted, family members of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people, and survivors of gender and race-based violence. I respectfully recognize that our meeting today is taking place on the traditional, unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Today, I stand with the MMIWG2S+ families, survivors, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people whose resilience and advocacy have been critical and pushing forward the Red Dress Alert initiative. My thanks to the federal government and MP Leah Gazan for their efforts towards the establishment and forthcoming implementation of the Red Dress Alert, a reflection of decades of advocacy for transformative changes and action. The Red Dress Alert is an essential tool for the protection of Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people, representing a significant advancement in our response to the crisis. Our communities are confronted with the daily disappearances of Indigenous women, girls, 2S LGBTQIA+ people, a reflection not of choice but of a societal disregard for Indigenous lives, making us targets for violence. The urgency of these situations cannot be overstated. When an Indigenous woman, girl, and gender diverse individual goes missing, immediate action is crucial in mobilizing information, resource, and collaborative efforts to facilitate locating them safely. The development and implementation of the Red Dress Alert should be led by Indigenous women, gender diverse people, and frontline Indigenous organizations. Effective response requires listening to those directly affected, especially in remote areas like Nunavut, where limited connectivity poses additional challenges. Engagements in these communities are essential to gather insights and guide our actions. The Red Dress Alert, along alongside comprehensive wraparound support services, aims to prevent and respond to these disappearances. These services must be rooted in Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing, and be independent from political influence. It is critical that they uphold the fundamental human rights of Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people in order for us to live with dignity and safety. I call on all levels of government to support the Red Dress Alert and its associated services, highlighting the need for prompt, impactful action and investments in a dedicated alert system for the Indigenous community. In conclusion, I thank you for this opportunity. The implementation of the Red Dress Alert is critical, not just a policy measure, but as a commitment to resolving the MMIWG 2S Plus national crisis without political obstruction. Our actions now can provide an opportunity for a secure, safer, more dignified future for Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people. Igose, thank you.
Thank you so much. We're now going to go online, and so Charlene, you have 5 minutes, but when you see me start moving my arms, your time's over. Okay, so Charlene, 5 minutes.
Hello, my name is Charlene LaValle. I'm the president of the Association of Métis, Non- and Status Indians of Saskatchewan. We have community charters across the province in several different areas on the northwest side of Saskatchewan, which is very remote, northeast Saskatchewan, which is even more remote. Then we move into our urban centers, and we cover all the urban centers in Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan encompasses or includes in its treaty territory Treaties 8, 10, 6, 7, 4, 2, and 5. And Saskatchewan is also the home of the Métis. AMSIS is not part of the distinctions-based groups. We are an organization under the Congress of Aboriginal People. We have been involved with the MMIWG National Roundtable since 2016. Up until February of this year, we were involved. There was a meeting this February that we were not invited to attend personally. In regards to the Red Dress Alert, I'd like to thank MP Leah Gazan for putting this forward. I listened in on the communication on Tuesday in relation to it was more about the processes of an alert system, and it was really interesting to hear how quickly it could be onboarded and started. I would say that one of the hardest things that has happened for MMIWG has been Bill C-18. Many of our people get their news on social media, and with news not being allowed any longer on social media, that has led to a large void in sharing the information about recent people who've gone recently missing. Couple of things I'd like to touch on is that it does need to, this Red Dress Alert and everything attached to MMIWG needs to be Indigenous led and needs to include all Indigenous people in Canada. The current distinctions-based policy identifying organizations is unconstitutional. The Constitution of Canada states, Section 35, are First Nations, Inuit, Métis. Daniels also included non-status in Section 35. Section 35 does not state AFN, ITK, and MNC. It does not state that. And right now with the distinctions-based approach, that's the approach that this government is using, and it's leaving out all the non-status, and it takes away my freedom of choice that I am supposed to have under the Charter of Rights and under UNDRIP, and thereby choosing to only work with certain groups. Again, Indigenous people, primarily women, are being left out of processes that could save their lives. All aspects of MMIWG calls to action need to be inclusive of all Indigenous groups. It should not be political. And processes need to be nationally streamlined by Indigenous organizations. The policing has not always worked in favor of vulnerable Indigenous people, and neither have government agencies like social workers. So I think that when considering all of these factors, that we have always said that policing has been a big part of the problem. And I think that those things need to be heard. And are you waving your hand at me?
Oh yes, Charlene, I am.
It was a faraway shot of the whole room, so I was just making sure. So yes, that would be what I have to say at this point.
Well, thank you so much for your testimony so far. What we're going to be doing is we'll be going around the room. Each party will have 6 minutes to ask their first round of questions, and then we'll go into our second round. I'm going to take the floor over to Michelle Frary for your first 6 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, guys, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. Certainly an important study that's impacted my riding, too, of Peterborough, Kawartha, and across this country. I'd like to hear from all of you, the point of this study really is to get a handle on how we best roll this out. How does it most efficient? And we had a phenomenal witness here this week who was just a rock star and doing it in Nova Scotia, and I'm sorry her first name has left me. Jennifer. Yeah, she was just incredible. And she had some really great points. And I guess, we hear the same thing from a lot of the witnesses, Indigenous led, for Indigenous, by Indigenous, which I think is critical. She didn't support the idea of this being government run. But I guess my question, and I'll start with Hilda if I can, and then ask the other witnesses to answer too. How do you see this? Do you see it independent of each location? Because we also have many Indigenous women and girls living off reserve, right? Living in urban centers. How do you see it rolled out? Is it a national program? How do you see it implemented?
First of all, I just want to really amplify that this is a national crisis, so I see it rolling out on a national level, to be fully supported and everybody to be part of it and to develop it collectively. Because we see one of the biggest challenges that we see, in working on the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is the issue of borders and jurisdiction, and that often hinders responses. So I think it has to be national in scope, and there has to be a national response, and it has to be, equitably resourced, to ensure that it is successfully implemented, and that regardless of where you live and which community you're from, that you're able to access the system.
Before I get the other witnesses to answer on that, to that point, and it was Jennifer who said this. I mean, she was kind of this person that just did it, right? And she talked about bureaucracy. And sometimes you have these great ideas and nothing happens because everybody sits around the table and goes, yeah, that sounds great. And then everybody walks away and there's no action tied to it because there's not one sort of leader. How do we prevent sort of bureaucracy in something like this? And I'm happy to hear if there's the other witnesses want to chime in. That is the biggest hurdle I see in a lot of these things, because I can't think of anybody who would dispute having this alert in place to save lives.
I think ultimately there has to be an accountability mechanism in place, to ensure that there is transformative action and commitment to ensure that, the red dress alert is implemented, because ultimately, inaction results in the continuance of the disappearances and the murders of Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people. So I really think that, ethically we have to look at the urgency for commitment and action, because our lives are dependent upon it.
Do any of the other witnesses online, Chantel, do you want to chime in?
I was just going to say, I think that this is very urgent. The calls to action were completed. It would be interesting to know how many more women have gone missing or murdered since the completion of the action plan. It's a daily thing. And for the families that have lost family members, it's for some of them, it's too late. So I think that it's very important. And I agree that it needs to be a national level with provincial, entities and working together, and instead of everybody working in separate little silos. And this way the information is shared across all jurisdictions.
So to Sandra, if I can, I guess what I'm really asking is, to the nuts and bolts, how do we make it national, but then give autonomy and not have it government interfered with?
I think that there is a place for government in all of this. Oftentimes we know historically and even in contemporary times, for things to move in the community, it has been Indigenous women with no support that have created change and have maintained change in our communities. So, and we have been carrying these issues for at least the last 50 years on our own. And so now we need government, we need bureaucracy to support this change, because we can't do it on our own. Obviously, that when rules and policies and laws don't change and they continue to, in the numbers of those that go missing and murdered continues to increase, we're not able to do this on our own. We need governments, we need bureaucracies to support and invest in change and invest in safety. We can start the alert now, and we must start it now, because women go missing. Summer for many people is a time of rest and respite, but for those of us on the ground, we know that the numbers of our relatives that go missing or murdered increases with the temperature. So we can do that. People that want to talk some more can talk some more and, work out whatever details or jurisdictional wrangling they may have, but we have to get it done now.
Thank you so much. We're now going to move over, and Emmanuel Lambropoulos has the floor for 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, and I want to start by thanking all of our witnesses for their great testimony and for being here to answer some questions on this very important study brought forward by Leah Gazan, who is a big advocate and talks about this very, very often and makes sure that we're talking about it here. So my first question is actually going to go to Charlene, because you were the last one to testify, and so this one is top of mind for me. You mentioned that policing is part of the problem, that law enforcement hasn't always sided with vulnerable Indigenous women, and I agree, of course. And I'm wondering what changes you think can be made in order to improve that situation and in order to improve collaboration with the police, in order to make the red dress alert something that they're helping and helpful in?
Well, ultimately, our police services are overworked as it is. And a lot of times when you're dealing with an issue of somebody missing, it takes a lot more time and effort and report processing than the police are able to put into. And it could always start with an organization outside of the police. It could it could start with an organization taking the information, working with the family, and then notifying the police, the agency notifying the police and going from there. This isn't a criminal offense. It's not, at that point, it's not a criminal incident. So it doesn't necessarily have to have police involvement right from the get-go. So and I guess I would, and we all recall, what was it, 2 years ago, it's just a check on the wellness of somebody, and we had a young Indigenous woman get killed, because sometimes it's things that are simple like that, and we have a stigma when it comes to policing and police officers, and sometimes it just de-escalates a whole situation when it's, somebody from their own community checking on them rather than a police officer.
Okay. So the trust is what's obviously missing, and it would be better if they were only involved when they need to be.
Correct.
Hilda, I'll go to you. You talked about the fact that it's necessary and critical for us to implement this as quickly as possible. There have been other witnesses that have been more in favor of it being run by organizations, and I think you spoke to that point as well. But of course, federal and provincial governments should also be helping fund and should be playing a role. And I'm wondering what role you think that the provinces and territories should play versus the role that the federal government should play.
Well, I think, one of the things that I really amplify in doing this work is, regardless if you're the federal government or provincial territorial government, everybody has a responsibility to be actors in the safety and security of Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people. And because, they have many individuals who reside in their provinces and territories, who go missing at alarming rates, I think it's really critical that everybody, take a collective, collaborative approach in the implementation of the red dress alert in order for it to be successful, like I mentioned previously, because often jurisdictional boundaries have hindered, the safe location of an Indigenous woman, girl, or Two-Spirit and gender diverse person. So I think it's equal participation amongst all governments.
Okay, thank you. Your name is being blocked, and I don't have it. Sandra, apologies. Sandra, you spoke about it, the importance of implementing it, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what we can do to ensure that it's safe and that it warrants the trust of Indigenous partners.
I think so. So the way the alert system currently works in the provinces is it's generally managed through their emergency management services, and decisions made on whether or not alerts go out is made by the police force. So I think having the family members or representatives of the community at the table when making those decisions is critical to ensuring trust. And then if an alert does not, it's determined an alert doesn't go out, that there be a measure in place that there would be an opportunity to review alongside community whether or not that was the right measure to take.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're now going to move it over to Audreyne LaRoche. Audreyne, you have 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all witnesses for being here today. I feel we have a duty of memory toward these girls and women who have been missing or murdered. We have to honor their memory and make sure that they did not die in vain. I'd like to begin with you, Madam. In your opening remarks, you talked about mobilizing people, engaging resources. Now we have to make sure how do you see what kind of resources will you need to mobilize so that this red dress alert can really be effective?
Thank you. I think, some of the critical resources we need is infrastructure, and to ensure that everybody has access to this red dress alert system, especially when we're looking at individuals who live in remote, isolated areas. And in addition to that, there also has to be wraparound supports, to support individuals who are in vulnerable positions who have gone missing. And, that there's a long-term sustainable commitment to fully resource the red dress alert system and to sustain it, because it just can't be, a one-off that it happens for 1 year and it does not continue. We need to ensure that it's around, for many, many years and for many generations, because our lives matter.
Merci beaucoup. Je reviendrai plus tard.
Thank you very much. I'll get back to you later with other questions. Now, following what I just asked about, Madame de la Ronde, in your report, you talked about the importance of support for families and that it should be a wraparound support. How do you see this wraparound support? Because this red dress alert won't be a magic wand. You'll need a whole spectrum, a continuum of services, all kinds of things. For example, prevention, other things. We're talking. I think that our study has to go beyond the alert itself.
Yes, absolutely. The study has to go, the work has to go beyond that annoying noise that we get on our phone, that we have to have people that are going to, once that alert is actioned, that there are going to be people on the ground that would assist and support families in locating their loved ones. And then that requires, whether we're looking at the Rangers model that in the NWT in the Yukon, or whether we're looking at the volunteer firefighters model in the provinces. Those people we have people that have some experience and dedication to the well-being of society that we can call upon to support this initiative. As well, families need to have wellness supports when someone goes missing. And critically, that we find that those that have gone missing and have been returned to families are traumatized. And so that there needs to be support to help them to regain their confidence and sense of well-being when they're returned to their families. So it's not just, issuing an alert on the system. It's important to provide that full spectrum of services. Thank you.
Oui, tout à fait. Je crois que...
Yes, exactly. I think that's very wise, and we will have to bear this in mind as we work on our report. Ms. Lavallée, in your opening remarks, you talked about including all groups and also the importance of this not being a political issue. And with you too, Ms. Laronde, I think that you mentioned this. But Ms. Lavallée, do you believe that this is a risk? What makes you think that at this stage there's a risk of this becoming political?
It already has become political. As I stated, we've been involved, the Congress of Aboriginal People had been involved with the roundtable, MMIWG roundtable, since 2016. And in February, there was first time it was an in-person in regards to the finalization since the completion of the calls to action. And our organization was not invited to attend personally. We asked if we could attend personally, and they did not invite us and would not change their mind and
Charlene?
stated that yes.
I know. 10 more seconds, or just a few seconds to end this, because we have to get on to our next round. So very, very, very quick.
Okay. We were told it was distinctions based only, which is MNC, AFN, and ITK.
Thank you so much. We're now going to turn it over to Leah Gazan. Leah, 6 minutes.
So I just want to start out by thanking this committee who have prioritized bringing our women and girls and diverse gendered relatives home. I want to thank you all for always making space for this discussion, and also to the women who join us in the room, real champions on literally the front lines night and day working on this issue, not just in an academic sense, but also working directly with families every single day. I want to thank you all for your efforts. My first question is for Hilda. You mentioned Nunavut. I know through the consultations there was like technology issues and all of that stuff. Why do you think it's important to engage stakeholders in Nunavut directly? Like, what are some of the reasons in that?
I think it's critical to engage, due to their remoteness and their isolation and their connectivity challenges as well. And, we need to ensure that all Indigenous people have services and infrastructure to meet their social and economic needs, for all governments to uphold the social and economic rights of Indigenous women, girls, and to us LGBTQIA plus people, with a focus on call for justice 4.1, and additionally, like, their experiences, can educate us, so that we ensure that their experiences and the type of services and responses that they need are included, because we often see a lack of resources and supports and a lack of engagement. Many people factor in the cost to engage our northern remote, our relatives who live in northern remote areas, but cost should not be a factor. They should have equitable participation in all different types of initiatives that are going to impact their lives.
Thank you so much. My next question is for Sandra. We've heard, I know that you, Hilda, spoke of it. I know that, Charlene, you spoke about this in terms of political interference. I'm wondering if you agree with that. And if you do agree, like, what does that look like very quickly, and how can things be done in a way that there's not political interference? And what is political interference? Quickly, in 20 seconds. Just kidding, but... Just kidding.
Well, I think, no, you're not kidding. I think that there is political interference. There's a want to appease individuals or individual organizations, and let me be clear that they are representative political organizations. They are not governments, regardless of the wording that has been used. They are representative political organizations. And many of us on the ground, on the front lines, have no less a commitment or responsibility to ensure change in our communities. I think that there needs to be greater weight given to those that actually do the work on the ground. And we've seen that through the consultations, those that had clear and distinct answers were those that did the work on the ground. So, and I understand it, that, people want more time to talk and to engage. And certainly that can happen along with the implementation process, because we know that when we talk and we find ways that we can do things better together. And but we can't wait because we've waited too long.
Thank you so much. My next question is for Charlene, just building on that. We've heard a lot, a lot of these battles have been led by women from our communities on the front lines of this issue, often unpaid. Why is it critical to center the voices of women, diverse gendered folks and families that have been impacted by this ongoing genocide?
You're on mute. Charlene, you're on mute.
Sorry, I didn't even get the question in that. Was that a question, is why
To
is it
center
the women?
women, diverse genders, and impacted families in terms of decision-making and discussions on the red dress outside of political organizations? Why is that critical?
Well, I think because a lot of it, we're the mothers, we're the aunties, the grandmothers. We've been the center of our families. And I think that when it comes to the emotional stuff that goes with all of those things that come with somebody going and missing, is that it's usually the women who are the ones who are on the ground doing the work. So that would be my answer to that.
Okay, so I just want to again thank, I only have 12 seconds, so I just again want to thank the committee. This means so very much. And also the witnesses that I just hold in such high regard, and just thank you for, it just feels so good to my spirit having other strong Indigenous women with me in committee today. It's a real treat. So thank you.
Thanks so much,
Leah.
Thanks, Leah. We're now going to go on to our second round. Second round. It's 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 2.5, 2.5. I'll pass the floor over to Anna.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all you brave ladies, because I know how important this study is, and thanks to Leah for bringing it forward. So I'm going to share something with you because I can kind of relate somehow, because I was part of the foster system, so I've seen a lot of stuff that I'd rather not speak about. But one of the things I read this book recently, and it says, "If I Go Missing." And it was written by, at the time, a 14-year-old young lady in 2016, Brianna Johnny. I hope I pronounced that right. And she wrote a letter to the Winnipeg Police Services imploring them to do better when investigating cases of missing Indigenous people. So I read on to the book, and I'm not going to read it all, but there was a quote in here that really kind of affected me. I guess maybe as well as what I had experienced in my past. And she wrote, she said, 2 years later, this is when she's older now, Brianna questioned Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at a town hall at the University of Winnipeg about the murdered, missing Indigenous women and girls inquiry. When so many no longer trust the process, how will you measure in qualified terms where the inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls is successful? So I'm thinking this is 2024, so if I can do my math, I think that's about 8 years. So I guess coming from the private sector, I am so sick and tired of things taking so bloody long. So I'd like to hear your comments, Hilda, because this is important. What do you say to that?
You know, I'm coming from the lens of an Indigenous woman, and often, you know, it feels like our lives are not valued, you know, that we don't matter, that, you know, it sends a message to society that it's okay to kill us, it's okay to kidnap us, it's okay to exploit us when governments do not take the necessary action. You know, that transformative action where there's impact on the ground, where I can feel safe and secure as an Indigenous woman in this country, and that my granddaughters and generations to come know that our lives are valued, and that if we go missing, that people are going to look for us, and they're going to take transformative action, and we're going to be safely located, and more importantly, that we're not going to continue to go missing at alarming rates, you know, that our lives matter, that we're valued, and that we have equity and equality in this country, and that our rights are upheld.
Well, I want to tell you, if anybody hasn't read this book, it is a great read. I had tears reading it. I'm not going to lie. I have tears even talking about it. So I guess my next question is to Charlene. You stated that when victims are found, they are traumatized. Is there any penalties for the perpetrators? And if so, what are those penalties? And what can we learn to stop this type of victimization?
There have been penalties, but if you go back on previous cases, the penalties have not been, I would say they have not been meaningful at all. And if anything, they've actually said that our lives are worth less because the penalties
Sorry to interrupt. So the penalties don't meet the crime. So how would you agree with me that we should give these perpetrators 25 years in jail to life?
Each individual case is different. I wouldn't say that, you know, but I definitely more than 18 months or 2 years for getting a hitch in the back of the head and changing somebody's life.
And the reason I say that is I met a 9-year-old recently who went through this traumatization, and it's a life-changing event. It's something that is so difficult to get over. And when they know that those perpetrators are out on the road again, it re-traumatizes them. So if we are going to do something to avoid this, we need to make the penalty fit the crime, because victims deserve to walk the streets without fear. Would you agree?
I 100% agree. But I would even go further and state that our mental health in Saskatchewan and across Canada is in crisis, because there are people out there that are suffering with those same experiences right now. And in Saskatchewan, it takes you 2 years to see a psychiatrist.
Perfect. Charlene, I have to cut you off again. I'm so sorry about this, but I'm now going to move it over for the next 5 minutes to Anita Vandenbelt. Anita, you have the floor for 5.
Yes, thank you very much, and I want to thank all of our witnesses, not just for being here today, but for all of the work that you're doing on this. And I guess my first question is really about the fact that, you know, some of you have mentioned the North, Nunavut, and issues and challenges around get the access to the communication systems, and then others talk about urban Indigenous and completely different challenges. How do we create a single system for the entire country when the challenges and the needs, and it's so incredibly different in different parts of the country? If I could maybe start with Ms. Anderson-Pierce, and then I'll go right.
I think, you know, when we're looking at it, we look at the need to provide, you know, funding for adequate resources so that each area can develop like the tools and the infrastructure that they need to, you know, be participants and to access these systems, you know. And, you know, especially when we're looking at the North, we know that there's inequity and inequality in accessing any type of service or support, and there needs to be a lot of work done there. And, you know, when we look at it's kind of like we also see like Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people who are leaving, you know, remote, isolated areas to access education, to access health, or to access, you know, a new way of life. So when we have to look at it like, you know, from a circular model and build that infrastructure so everybody feels that they're part of it and that this system is accessible.
If I may just follow up before I go to the others. When you talk about that infrastructure, maybe if you could be specifically, what exactly does that mean in terms of staff, in terms of funding, in terms of how it would
So
work?
we need to look at like what is the infrastructure required. Like I'm not a technician by any means, but like, you know, the technical aspect of them having the tools and the technology to participate in this red dress alert, but also the supports and resources, you know, to take care of the mental and emotional well-being of individuals who have been impacted, you know, by violence and who have gone missing as well. But we also need to look at it from a prevention lens as well, and to ensure that supports and resources are there to, you know, prevent Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people from going missing.
Ms. De La Ronde, you mentioned urban Indigenous. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit as well about the different challenges, the different structures and the different needs that there may be for urban Indigenous peoples.
Oh, okay, thank you for your question. Could I just say, this morning I got up and I thought, geez, you know, what would it be like to get up and not have to worry about, you know, one of our loved ones going missing or one of our loved ones being murdered? That's the reality as Indigenous moms and grandmothers in this country. No one else has to experience that. Winnipeg is known as ground zero. And, you know, if I could wake up in the morning and know that this is a safe country, a safe city for my daughter and granddaughter, I would be the happiest woman alive. And knowing that there are disparities between representative political organizations, that there is limited funding, that really the ones that are doing doing the work on the ground is families and survivors. So they need to have adequate resource. But we also have to support them going beyond the trauma, you know, because we can be stationary in this place and it doesn't serve the individual or the community in any way. When someone is murdered in our community, the perpetrator is not asking them if they're First Nations or Métis or Inuit. They just know that it is a vulnerable Indigenous woman that they're taking their lives. So I think that we need to consider that as you know, understanding that the urban environment is different, that we take into account the community that are already doing the work and support those communities in developing greater support and accessibilities for our families. There is a room for if I could just add, there is a room for distinction based in the area of prevention.
I just want to thank you because it's easy to forget how real this is, the grief, the trauma that you are all living when we're putting a system together. I want to thank you for reminding us of that.
Thanks very much. We're now going to move over to Adrienne Laroche for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Adrienne, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you again to our witnesses. Thank you for appearing today. Your testimony is extremely instructive. Ms. De La Ronde, I'd like to get back to your opening remarks. You talked about UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I'd like you to talk about this a little more because as we try to establish this nation-to-nation relationship in the context of national reconciliation, I'd like you to talk a little more about the spirit of UNDRIP for the Red Alert, and do you know of any experiences in other countries that are similar?
I can say that what I do know is that there is a movement in the Global South that is, again, you know, looking to Canada, but in other ways are more advanced than Canada in terms of providing protection on the basis of rights to Indigenous women and girls. I don't think that we have really had an inclusionary process in this country that recognizes Indigenous women as rights holders. And that was affirmed in the final report of the National Inquiry, and we need to continue to support what does those rights look like for Indigenous women and their families. It certainly is not necessarily what's presented because there hasn't been that opportunity to speak with us because our voices have been silent. So creating those opportunities to hear from Indigenous women and girls and gender diverse relatives is really important and critical in the red dress movement, but more importantly, in how we live in civil society. One of the things that we have often forgotten or misplaced is, as a result of the genocidal policies of government, that in fact Indigenous women are misplaced, are internally displaced persons under the meaning of the UN Convention on Refugees. So what does that look like? How will we deal with that in terms of the long-term?
Thanks very much. I do have to cut you off for the next section, so thank you very much. I'm now going to pass it over to Leah for the final round.
Thank you so much. I know that all the witnesses spoke about the importance of wraparound supports. My question is for Hilda. What does wraparound supports look like for you, and why is it important?
Thank you so much, Leah. And, I just really wanted to quickly amplify, when we look at, this is really about justice and human security as well. And we really need to put a lens on the principles for change from the National Inquiry, when we look at a focus on substantive equality, on human and Indigenous rights. It has to be like a decolonizing approach. Wraparound services, they have to be strength-based, rooted in our Indigenous ways of being, knowing, and doing. They have to be holistic, and it will help with, strengthen us as Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people with the protective factors, to allow us to live a life with dignity, and safety. In addition to this, wraparound services also uphold our Indigenous and human rights, because as Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people, when we're born with a bundle of rights, and right from birth as Indigenous women, our rights are not upheld. So it's really critical, especially when we look at Call for Justice 3.4, which is, for all governments to ensure Indigenous communities receive immediate and necessary resources, including funding and support for the establishment of sustainable, permanent, no-barrier, preventative, accessible, holistic wraparound services. And in addition to this, I also wanted to quickly highlight Call for Justice 3.1. It states that all governments ensure the rights to health and wellness of Indigenous people, and specifically Indigenous women and girls are recognized and protected on an equitable basis. And, we also look at the importance of creating pathways for human security. And if we do that, we will be really focusing on what wraparound supports look like from our lens, and ensuring that, we see ourselves in those wraparound supports, that we feel connected, that we feel like we belong, and these supports are meeting our needs, from a cultural lens, because often supports and services that are out there are not meeting our needs, and often they're, really deeply embedded with systemic and structural racism. And when we're vulnerable, we're seeking safety. We continue to experience violence because of the systemic and structural racism.
Wow, what an incredible panel. I would like to begin by just thanking Hilda and Keely, and online Sandra and Charlene. Thank you so much for your testimony today. We do greatly appreciate it. What we're going to be doing is we're going to suspend so we can switch over panels, and then we'll get started immediately. So thank you to the ladies, and back in a second.